Will this be the summer of the NHL RFA Offer Sheet? It's been a long time since we've seen one, but with the crop of players that are RFAs this summer, there's a lot of speculation this might be the year we finally see one. Which players are most likely to receive one? Which teams are the most likely ones to hand them out? And what kind of compensation would they have to give up if they're successful? We'll get into all that coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So today we're talking about offer sheets. Will we see one? Who might throw one out there as a team? What players might be the most likely to receive? And what kind of compensation is given back to the teams if they're successful in luring a player to their organization through that method? So let's get started here by taking a look at the compensation model if any of these teams are successful in landing a player to their organization through the offer sheet method. See on the screen, the big factor here is the value of the contract over 5 years. Now, if the contract is less than $1.3 million per year, there is no compensation. It's very unlikely we'd see anything in that category anyway. Most players that could possibly be targeted would certainly be looking for much more money than that. Any player that falls into $1.3 to $2.1 million, it would only be a third round pick. A contract that falls between $2.1 and $4.2 million is only a second round pick for compensation. Once you get up to $4.2 to $6.3 million, it's a first round pick and a third round pick. And of course, once you go from 6.3 to 8.4, now you're looking at a first round pick, a second round pick, and a third round pick. So starting to get a little bit more hefty. If you get up to 8.4 to 10.5, it goes up quite a bit again. 2 first round picks, a second and a third, and anything over that $10.5 million mark, it's 4 first round selections. Now, of course, in order for these teams to even consider making an offer sheet for the value that we just discussed, they do have to have the necessary draft picks in place before they can even consider making that offer. Because if they don't have the compensation to hand over in return for the player if they're successful, then it's not going to work anyway. So that has to be in place, and it has to be their own picks. It can't be other picks that they've acquired via trade. So that certainly does limit some teams here as well. But that's the compensation. There is such a strong group of RFA forwards, defense, and goalies this year, it's hard to say which ones would be most likely to receive one. Let's take a look at some of the most prominent players that are most likely to receive a potential offer through an offer sheet. Getting started first here with the RFA defensemen and goalies, because there's not quite as many prominent players that fall into those categories. When you take a look at the defense, you can start with Jacob Trouba, the Winnipeg Jets. We talked about the Winnipeg Jets cap issues. Obviously, they're going to have a lot of tough decisions to make, and Trouba is not the only Jets player that we're going to be talking about here today, but he is one of the more prominent ones, had a 50-point season. He's an up-and-coming young defenseman, right shot, put up 50 points. Going to garner a fairly good-sized contract. The Jets probably can't afford to pay him at this point, so it could be a possibility here that teams might target him that way. Of course, that's assuming that some of these players may be traded first. If teams know they can't sign them, they obviously would be smart to try to trade them ahead of time. Obviously, in some of these cases, they may be traded before an offer sheet can ever be rendered, because that can't happen until after July the 1st. So it is possible some of the names on this list very well could be moved before that comes to be. But outside of Jacob Trouba, you've got a couple of defenders on the Boston Bruins who might be Stanley Cup champions by the time we reach this point. We're talking about Charlie McAvoy and Brandon Carlo. They've been absolutely tremendous through the playoffs. Now, in case of McAvoy, I think his contract will be more significant than Carlo's. They are both very valuable defensemen to the Bruins, and I'm sure they will want to keep them in place here. But again, a couple of really strong players that could be considered by other teams. Of course, you got a pair over with the Flyers as well, youngster Ivan Provorov and Travis Sanheim. In Sanheim's case, he's coming off a very up season where his numbers were up significantly. In Provorov's case, his numbers were down considerably, but either way, they're both pretty solid young defenders. Now let's take a look at some of the more prominent forwards who fall into this category as well. Of course, it's led by Toronto Maple Leaf star Mitch Marner. I think the Marner contract very well could set the market here. Obviously, it's been reported that Mitch Marner is looking for something comparable to his teammates like John Tavares and Austin Matthews, who are both over the $11 million mark. Marner has kept up with him production-wise over the past year, so it certainly kind of makes sense, I guess, in a way that he wants that type of money. I mean, he is a winger compared to being a center, and that does play a role in what these guys get paid as well. But that's what's being reported out there, and there was an update today from Darren Dreger on, I believe it was on the radio on Leafs Lunch earlier today, indicating that he feels the Marner camp is going to push this beyond July 1st and make it very difficult for the Leafs to get a deal done before the July 1st cutoff for an offer sheet could possibly be received. Free agency period begins to kick off obviously in the UFA's case, and it applies to RFAs as well, but many people don't realize this, that when players are eligible to talk to other teams about a week before July the 1st and start gathering data to see if there might be better offers out there and decide where they may want to go. So come July 1st, they very well might be able to sign. Dreger was saying today that he feels that the Marner camp likely will take it that far and likely will seek offers from other teams, which could possibly lead to an offer sheet on July 1st. Now, one thing I would stress that is unlikely, I'm not sure that it's as likely as they make it out to be because of the fact that Marner is likely looking for $11+ million, which has obviously been reported numerous times. Now, if he can come down and settle for less than that, which I'm sure the Leafs are offering, he would likely sign and be done with it. It would take an offer sheet, I do believe, of at least 11 or more to even peg his interest here. And if that's the case, you're giving up 4 first-round picks. You better make sure, if you're an NHL team doing that, that this adding Mitch Marner to your lineup is going to put you over the top to be an instant Stanley Cup contender, because otherwise you're going to be sending yourself back with 4 first-round selections out the window. I mean, Mitch Marner's a fabulous player, but he's only one guy. I mean, most of the teams that we're talking about here that have the cap space and potential to add a player of this magnitude are not really perennial cup contenders. Most of them are either rebuilding or they're kind of in that phase where they've been rebuilding it for a little while and they're kind of starting to be a little bit more competitive now, but they're not at the top of the league. So it's highly doubtful that I think Marner gets a contract offer that way, but Dreger's reporting that he believes that his camp will be soliciting some information from other teams during that interview period, and that it is possible this could drag on beyond July 1st, which could create quite a contract and salary cap conundrum here for the Leafs, as they have many other things to decide and look after, and he could hold up a lot of other moves that might need to be made. So that one will be the most interesting to watch and likely will set the market once that decision has been made and that deal has been settled. But outside of Marner, you've got a big nine player in Colorado with Mikko Rantanen. You got Braden Point in Tampa. Of course, Tampa's up against the cap, and Braden Point's proven to be one of the top players in the league, so that's going to be very interesting. You've got Brock Besser out in Vancouver, who's been a terrific young player for the past couple of years. Like I said, with the Jets, they've got hard decisions to make here with Patrick Laine and Kyle Connor, along with defenseman Trouba that we just mentioned. Of course, besides Marner, he's got his Leaf buddies, Andreas Johnsson and Kasperi Kapanen on this list. You've got William Karlsson out in Vegas. You've got Sam Bennett in Calgary. And I know many of you might be thinking, oh, Sam Bennett's not a real big name. You're right. He's only been a 25, 30-point guy. But you know what? Taking a look at the compensation that you'd have to give up on some of these contracts, would you potentially consider taking Sam Bennett for a second or third round pick? Because that's all it's going to take for the type of contract that he's likely looking at. And when you factor in other decisions that the Flames need to make, they might be able to snag him for a pretty small price tag like that. You have Sam Bennett's teammate Matthew Tkachuk, who's going to be taking a big chunk of the salary cap that the Flames have available there, so it's going to leave some other players susceptible to that type of thing. Of course, you got Sebastian Aho with the Carolina Hurricanes as well. He's had a big season now. I do think he's less likely to be a target because the Canes have a lot of space and should be able to get him locked up here. You got Timo Meier, the San Jose Sharks, along with Kevin Labanc. Both proved to be valuable playoff performers as well. So certainly a couple of guys to keep your eye on out west. And I even put down Jesse Puljujarvi, the Oilers. The Oilers don't have a ton of cap space. They do have some, but this is a player that they're not really sold on. At least it doesn't appear to be for a long-term future. So it wouldn't be shocking to find his agent and him looking possibly for an offer sheet to maybe get a fresh start. And if that's the case, and the Oilers might decide to take a second or third round pick and let him go, or they very well might match. Hard to say, but just another player that is a little bit intriguing because he's not really settled and not really sure what his long-term future holds with his current team. So another one to keep your eye on, but nothing of too prominent contract there. I don't expect Puljujarvi to be getting any major offers, but like Sam Bennett, those are guys that you might want to watch, though, just because of the compensation is not really all that much to snag them off those current rosters. Which teams are the most likely to go after some of these players and be willing to pay the price tags that we just discussed? I'm going to give you now my top 10 list. Now, of course, I'm going to start with the New York Islanders. You get a very aggressive general manager in Lou Lamoriello. He has a team that has a lot of decisions to make. They have a captain again in Anders Lee, who's a pending UFA here. They just signed Brock Nelson. They have Robin Leonard, who had a terrific year, who's a UFA. They have all kinds of cap space, and they have a lot of decisions to make. And going after a top young player certainly would be something that I would not be shocked to see Lou do here. Could he possibly go after some of the former Leafs that he knows very well? I don't see him going after Marner like I've seen some people say, but I could see him maybe targeting a guy like a Johnsson or a Kapanen. There's certainly prime targets because of the contracts and the compensation that would be required to snag them from a team in a salary cap crunch. Next team I think is possible is the Detroit Red Wings. They have over $13.5 million in cap space. They have all kinds of draft picks. They got a brand new GM in Steve Yzerman, who's been known to be aggressive and make bold moves before. Could we see him go after a top defender like a Jacob Trouba? I know I mentioned the possibility maybe making a trade as well. Well, if you think about it, really doing an offer sheet is a form of a trade, except you're only trading picks instead of players or prospects off your roster or organization here. So it's a possibility I could see him going down that road. Or would he even possibly consider going after his former player in Tampa, Braden Point, considering the Lightning are in a pretty tough cap crunch situation? I'm not really sure that it's a move he would make for sure, but I think it's something that you have to consider. I know before Ken Holland left Detroit, he was talking about how the Red Wings were an organization who felt like they could possibly go down that road and use an offer sheet this summer. Hard to say if Yzerman feels the same way or not, but they're in a well-positioned place that they certainly could consider that this year for sure. I think the Montreal Canadiens are also a team to be watching here. They have close to $12 million in space. They're in desperate need of a top-scoring winger ideally. They could use a left-shot defenseman as well, and there's certainly players that fit both of those criteria. Could we see them maybe go after a left-shot defenseman like an Ivan Provorov or one of the top-scoring wingers? Certainly would not rule it out. They have all kinds of picks. They got the space to get it done. They need a player of this magnitude and either capacity here, and I would not be shocked to see Marc Bergevin maybe give this a shot. Next up, there's the New Jersey Devils. Now, the New Jersey Devils, again, have tons of picks. They have tons of cap space. They have over $35 million in cap space. They have the #1 overall selection this summer. Of course, they had it a few years ago as well when they selected Nico Hischier. So they got the picks. They got the space. They got a good young group of players that they're building around. They're likely adding Jack Hughes to that mix to accelerate their rebuild here by maybe adding another dynamic player, maybe a defenseman perhaps, or perhaps another young scoring forward to add to this great mix that they're working on building here. Next up, we have the Carolina Hurricanes, who have over $28 million in cap space. They have an aggressive owner in Tom Dundon. We've seen them have a playoff run here, so they're getting a taste of what it's like to have success again. Their fans are certainly back into it. They were filling their building in the playoffs. Things certainly greatly improved throughout the year with the Hurricanes organization. They have their own RFA and Sebastian Aho to look after here, so it's not a foregone conclusion that they'll go after another player, but it's certainly something I would not rule out. Tom Dundon appears to be a little bit aggressive here, and I can see them really trying to build upon their conference final appearance this year and see what they can do next year, get back in the playoffs, and start having this franchise be a consistent playoff performing team. Next up, we got the New York Rangers. Now, the Rangers also, like many of these teams, have lots of picks. They have $19 million in cap space. They have a large group of young forwards and defense to build around here. They've gone and gathered a lot of prospects, a lot of picks over the last couple of years as they started this rebuild. Things are certainly moving along. Now, they may decide to go more down a UFA road and kind of spend on experience instead of going down one of these RFAs that are, pretty solid players, but young and still inexperienced. We've seen rumors about maybe an Artemi Panarin or an Erik Karlsson. Hard to say. The Rangers are speculated to be very busy this summer, making lots of moves. They got the new president, John Davidson. They have the resources to spend to the cap, no problem, should they decide to do that. So the Rangers are certainly a team to keep your eye on. It's not quite sure yet if they're going to go more of an RFA offer sheet or UFA players to bring into their organization, but either way, they're going to be analyzing all their moves and trying to add a couple of top players to their team for the coming year. Next up, there's the Arizona Coyotes. Now, the Coyotes are a little bit less likely than some of these teams. Based on past history, though, I think John Chayka is the type of GM I can see trying this, but based on the current state of the franchise and the salary cap, it is a little bit less likely compared to some of these other teams. They have around $9 million in cap space, which isn't a ton of space, but they have many of their younger players already locked up to longer term deals. They don't have as much to kind of get settled over their own internal contracts this year, so they could decide to spend. However, the team is currently in a bit of an ownership change. There's been reports that current owner Andrew Barroway is selling majority stake of the team, and that's expected to be on the Board of Governors meeting coming up here in a few weeks' time. So they very well might not be in a position to really spend much money because of the pending sale and all that closing and the timing of it all. We've already had reports during other trade discussions that they may have trouble bringing in a top player via trade too. So hard to say. I'm not sure the Coyotes can get this done because of the ownership thing. But based on having the draft picks, I think their GM's the type to try it in the current space available. Based on all that, I can see it happening. I mean, they certainly have a desperate need to bring in a scoring forward, and there's plenty of them out there that might be prime for these, and there's plenty of them out there that are prime targets. So from all that perspective, I think it's likely, but because of the ownership situation, I can see it maybe holding them back here. Next up, we have the Philadelphia Flyers with new GM Chuck Fletcher trying to leave his mark here. Now, he does have a lot of his own internal contracts to satisfy, but they have over $30 million of cap space. They have a couple of their own defensemen they need to look after first as well, between Sanheim and Provorov, which are certainly guys I'm sure they would prefer to keep in the organization. But they have been linked to possibly trading a D-man. More likely would be Shane Gostisbehere if that did happen. At least that's what the rumors speculate that likely would be. So if that's the case, if they sign these guys to new deals but trade at Gostisbehere, that would kind of level out a little bit of the cap space, depending on what they brought back in that trade, of course. So I can see the Flyers possibly being aggressive, but at the same time, out of all these teams, I do think they're a little bit less likely than some, just because they are loaded with great prospects. The Flyers have done an absolutely terrific job at drafting. They have a lot of exciting forwards on the way. They got a fairly young D-core. They got a great young goalie in Carter Hart. They're going to have to preserve some of this cap space for a couple years' time when their already existing players are going to be needing new contracts. So they probably won't go hog wild here. But at the same time, I know that the Flyers ownership and upper management were certainly getting antsy to get winning again and getting back to the playoffs. So we might see them make a bold move this summer. Would not be shocking, but they might go down the route of a trade instead of an RFA offer sheet. But they have the picks, and they have the space, and they have everything else lined up here to be primed to make this kind of deal. Next up, we've got the Columbus Blue Jackets, who are likely going to have all kinds of space, assuming they lose their UFAs and Artemi Panarin, Sergei Bobrovsky, Matt Duchene, possibly Ryan Dzingel. I do think Dzingel's a more likely of the group to stay, but well, I guess time will tell here. But it does look as though the other three likely are leaving. I mean, I can't confirm that, of course. That's just my own gut feeling based on what we've seen so far. GM Jarmo Kekalainen indicate that he wants players that are going to play for Columbus to want to be Blue Jackets and be members of the community and enjoy being there. So that certainly gave us indicators that they likely are leaving too. So if they lose all these players, they're going to have a ton of room, and they're certainly going to have a lot of positions, especially within the forward group and possibly in goal, to consider making upgrades on. So they could certainly go down this road here. I mean, take a look at goaltending. If they lost Bobrovsky, would they possibly go after St. Louis Jordan Binnington? I mean, Binnington could be a Stanley Cup winning goalie, or at the very least a Stanley Cup Finals appearance guy who's been tremendous throughout this playoffs and turned this franchise around. I don't think he's as likely to get targeted as some of the other players, but it's just an example. And can go about this in a variety of ways, and I do expect their general manager, who was very aggressive at the deadline, kind of rolled the dice and went all in to go for a cup, even though they fell short. I can see them doing the same thing here in free agency, whether it be UFAs or RFAs, to try to rebuild this team and keep them competitive moving forward. And last but not least on this list, we've got the Colorado Avalanche, who have well over $30 million in cap space as well. Once they come to terms with Mikko Rantanen, a lot of that space will be eaten up as well, but it's still going to leave a lot of room. They have a desperate need for secondary scoring, and there's lots of great players on this list who would certainly help out with that dramatically. They have a lot of great young defenders. The goaltending situation appears to be pretty stable as well, so more likely if they did go after somebody would be a forward to help with the secondary scoring here. So either way, the Avalanche are another team. They got lots of picks, they got lots of space, just a matter of how aggressive they want to be. So those are the top 10 teams I think are most likely to use the offer sheet this summer. I do think if it's going to happen, this is the year for it. There's so many teams that are in cap trouble and so many great players that need new expensive contracts. If we don't see it this year, I'm not sure we ever will. It's the prime time for it. So I guess we'll see. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Do you think we're going to see an offer sheet this year? And which teams or players do you see most likely having it happen to? If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. If you're new, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.